Right, okay. So session 2 for Reinterpreted Compositions. Like I said, we're going to take some of the stuff that we talked about last week and we're going to explore it in greater depth. But what we really need is the materials that you were asked to produce between the two sessions. So I set you that challenge of taking a piece of script and then breaking it apart really and looking at the visual kind of sequence and then the script and finding opportunities to rethink the designs of both the beats within a shot itself, and a sequence. You know, how a sequence works based on changing certain shots or certain beats within shots. So today is really about kind of unpicking that in greater detail and understanding the relationship that exists between this kind of stuff, this kind of rough story art, rough story art and rough sketches, and how that then informs more refined pieces of design. And what can we actually use story art for? Like, what is the point? Because I think that's one of the things, especially as a student, I remember thinking, like, if something doesn't have a point, why am I doing it? Like, if I can't see a tangible reason as to why this piece of artwork needs to be created or this piece of writing needs to be done, why is it needed? So this is really about exploring what we call a professional pipeline and understanding the relationship between all of these artifacts and how they kind of work. So yeah, make sure you've got access to all that. I want to go through some stuff though first about what we actually mean by a cinematic piece of design and a cinematic shot, and go into a little bit more depth. So let me just switch this up. We'll get onto the screen. That's really helpful. And here we go, session 2. Let's go with this. So we're going to go through this for about 10-15 minutes and talk about this idea of like shot refinement. And then we're actually going to start working in Photoshop, and I'm going to walk you through how you would use a piece of story art to inform something more complex, like a piece of visual development art. Okay, like what's the relationship? How do we move from one to another? But before we get to that, we need to kind of go back a little bit and think about like what these shots actually are and why they exist. Because I think we sometimes can get so lost in the technical, like how something is done and how to make it look good, that we sometimes forget about the logical side of it. Like why? Why am I doing it? Why does it need to look this way? And why would it not work if it were done differently? So let's talk about that. So let's go back to these to some of the rules that we can follow. We talked about like a sequence as a sentence last week. Very briefly mentioned this. Think of a sequence of shots as a sentence, and each shot as a word, and each beat as a letter. And you need all of them for a poem to work. You know, every single component has to work together nicely. So the right words have to be placed next to one another. Also, apart from one another. You know, sometimes you have to give distance between shots in order to make each shot effective, just like you do words in a poem. And I think that's really important to remember when you're designing. Don't just think about the technique and the refinement of the drawing, but think about the idea of language. Cinema has a language, and that means that bad grammar can exist. And bad grammar is that placement of two shots together that shouldn't really go together, or placement of two shots that should go together, but neither of them are timed or paced correctly. One's too fast and one drags out too long. It could be that the shots don't fit the theme. Okay? Think about writing a poem about flowers and using really aggressive, offensive language. It's a juxtaposition. Yeah, a flower is something that is delicate and almost ethereal. So violent language is opposed to that design. And it's the same when we think about the themes of our story and the types of shots that we use for it. If we use aggressive, hard cuts and hard angles when we're trying to tell something that is calm and slow and peaceful, that doesn't work. There's a conflict, and that's bad grammar. So we need to really think about that. Shots not built on characters. Characters are not what define a shot at all. Characters are obviously an important component in a shot because they are the story we're trying to tell. But actually what should really define and what should be the building block of the shot is the idea of perspective. The perspective of the audience, so us as people, what do we need to see within a shot to make it super effective? But also the perspective of the camera. And I mentioned this briefly last week as well. Think of the camera as if it were a person. Okay, who is that person, and what impact is their perspective, or is the perspective they have going to have on them? How are they going to react to what they see unfolding in front of them? And when you start to think like that, that's when you can design really clever shots. A great example in the sequence we looked at last week, the Spider-Verse sequence, was where the web hits the window of the subway train, and the little boy I think he's like on his phone, or he's sort of facing the window, isn't it? And it just hits him there, and it shocks him. It makes him go ah. And the brilliance of that is the way it was framed was almost like a reflection. It was exactly the same height and angle as you would have if you looked in like a bathroom mirror. So it was almost like it was for us and for him. It was a dual shot. It was supposed to make us both go, oh no, something's happening. And that's what we call clever design. Okay, it's good grammar, and it's a good understanding of perspective. It's also why we can sometimes to make something feel really big or really powerful, we shoot it from really low down. So the perspective, the way we feel about something, is that it is kind of terrifying. So, and I'll show you a good example of this idea of just adjusting perspective to help build that idea of good grammar and good meaning. And then finally, think about that audience. How do they feel? What do you want them to feel? All right? If you want your audience to feel scared, you need to frame the shot in a way that is scary. Okay? That's how horror works. That is the very definition of horror filmmaking, is to design shots that scare the living daylights out of people, that make them feel uncomfortable, that show them more than they should be ever allowed to witness, or do not show them enough of the thing that they are worried about. To withhold information, to push it into the background. There's some great sort of master horror filmmakers that have done that, actually. And we're in a bit of a renaissance of horror. Now is the time to go and look at really strong horror films in terms of like shot composition, shot design. I don't know, have any of you seen the film Hereditary? Go and check it out. I think it's on Netflix, actually. Go and check out Hereditary. It's got some brilliantly terrifying shots in it. As has Us. Us has got some absolutely horrific shots in it as well. So think about that idea. How do you want your audience to feel, and use that. That's the motivator for what you design. If you want them to feel amazed, show them something amazing. Show them a shot that really exemplifies how amazing the narrative is that we're seeing. That's kind of why we tend to do, especially like modern sci-fi in the last 25 years. When they shoot stuff in space, they shoot it at really unnatural angles. Like they'll shoot spaceships just like vertical or upside down, or they'll shoot a space battle like from below. And those kind of shots, they work because we'll never experience anything like that perspective on Earth. That's why it's effective. So think about that. What do you want them to feel? Make it the driver of the composition. And then finally, if something works, it works. So it's okay to use it. There's nothing clever about avoiding using effective shots. Okay, we looked at it in the Spider-Verse sequence last week, in that despite all of the mad stuff that was going on with like the multi-panel and the faraway shot of him like bouncing over the top of cars, all these clever shots were still glued together with lots of mid shots. Loads of mid shots that showed character expression and the relationship between Miles and Peter as they're kind of moving through that space. So all of those things are very kind of ordinary shots. They're just mid shots. Some were close-ups, but most of them were sort of like 3/4 of the body. And they use them because they work. So don't be afraid of it. Don't think that everything you design has got to be like super different or special. So anyone know what that film is? Yeah. Yes. 12 Monkeys. It's a great film. It's crazy. I watched it and was like, I really enjoyed that, but I don't know what happened or why. I'm not sure kind of what happened in this. So I went back and watched it a few times. But it's a very, very clever film. In that it's what it does very well. Yes, it does weird post-apocalyptic sci-fi. And it does, Bruce Willis doing his late 90s kind of I'm a method actor thing that he went through. But actually what it does extremely well is it allows the audience to believe or begin to believe that the main character is not a reliable source of information, that he might be mad, yeah, he might be crazy, and everything that's happening might just be in his head. He says to himself it's not, and we see lots of evidence that it's not, that the events of this film, which involve time travel and dilation of time sequences and things like that, just really kind of complex sci-fi theories. And we see all of this. None of it's hidden. It's all there in plain scene after scene. We see him in the future. We see him in the past. We see him in our present. We see him in our immediate past. It all gets a bit crazy. So there's nothing secretive about it. But the way that they frame him and the way that they shoot his character, we do, as an audience, begin to question that maybe all of those other shots are fabrications, that he is imagining these things, or they are part of a bigger psychosis. And I think at one point even he starts to think he's crazy as well. But how they do it is through very, very effective shots like this. Does anyone know what type of shot this is called? Sorry?
Is it a close?
It is a close-up, but it's something else as well. It has a very specific name, this type of shot. It's called a Dutch angle. Okay, a Dutch angle is where we apply a slight tilt on the shot, and we use it to emphasize a very specific type of behavior. So the Dutch angle, we can see that the camera is not straight. Yeah, the camera is tilted to one side. But then what we've got this really strange thing where even though it's tilted to one side, he's not quite as tilted as the camera is. So his head is tilted to one side. Like we can kind of see that here, yeah. Like he's not dead straight. He's not vertical. But the angle of the camera and the sort of position of the camera is actually more extreme than his position. Okay, so you can try this right now just to understand why it makes us feel weird. If you stand up and just try and tilt your body to one side and hold that. That is a very unnatural position to exist in. Imagine if your whole world, if the horizon line was forever tilted and there was never a vertical line anymore in your life. Every line was just off to one side, just kind of tilted at an angle. It's unnatural. Your brain is not designed to look at lines on diagonals. It's designed to see perfectly flat horizons because we exist in a three-dimensional space. So we have a vanishing point, which means we have a horizon line, and it's designed to see vertical objects because stuff literally grows out of the ground up. Yeah, everything comes up out of the ground vertical. So tilting things at an angle, actually on a near subconscious level, makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us feel like something's not quite right. Okay, and that's the power of this shot, is by just tilting it, it makes you think, you know what, maybe he belongs in that asylum with those people. Like maybe he's not a time traveler who's accidentally found himself locked up in a mental hospital, but maybe he is actually just, mentally ill. And that's conveyed through shots like this. So that's what we mean. We want our audience to feel a certain way. We don't want them to trust his character, to trust Cole. We want them to doubt him and to at least doubt his perception of his environment. And it's all done just by tilting the camera. And there's some really interesting other stuff here as well, like where he's positioned. So his position here means that there are kind of like two vanishing points. There's one here and there's one here. So if you think about it like 2-point perspective drawing, like both of those vanishing points come together, and his face is like the apex of those points. So it's designed like a series of geometric shapes. It's designed with quite simplistic composition. This is not an accident. Okay, great shots are not accidents. They are designed. Anyone know what that's from? This is a piece of story art. It's animated. But any ideas? No, it's actually from the first Hotel Transylvania film. It's one of the lead-in shots. But what's kind of interesting about this actually is that it does the same thing. It applies a very simple Dutch angle. So not as extreme, but can you see it here? So there's our horizon line across the bottom. It's not flat anymore. The camera's tilted. So the camera's kind of gone like that, and it's just tilted that way to create a sense of unease. So the camera's not straight, it's just tilted off. But what that does is it just tells us we're not in the natural, normal world. Yeah, we're in the supernatural. Okay, we're beyond the realm of our reality. We're heading into something else. Okay, very, very simple technique, but it just adds a sense of mystery. And again, think about the geometric shapes here. So we've got, this is our horizon line across the bottom. Our vertical line is now at an angle. So this is our big vertical shape with this castle rising up. And then we've got a lot of other shapes that kind of lead in towards it. I like the way that this gravestone is like accidentally on purpose kind of leaning towards the castle. Yeah, the characters' heads are all kind of pointing and their body shapes are pointing up towards the castle. So even though it's quite a detailed drawing, it's built on some very, very simplistic fundamental shapes. And that's what we need to try and aim for. Can we start with simplicity and build complex pieces of story design and shot design? Here's another one. So this again is a very, very subtle Dutch angle. So this is Corpse Bride, Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. And what's really interesting about this is it uses the same principles. So she's not coming out of the ground at an angle. Okay, she is vertically rising kind of upwards. Yeah, this is her first kind of appearance. So she's going straight up. But you can see that actually the way it's drawn, she leans in at a slight angle. Okay, she's just ever so slightly tilted inwards. So it just implies that ever so slightly the camera's not flat. It's just a tiny 2 or 3 degree tilt counterclockwise. Okay, creates a sense of drama, makes us feel that we're in the supernatural world, which we are. We're in the land of the, it's his kind of bridge into the world of the dead. And what's really nice about it is that we've got, he looks at first to be parallel, but he's not. They're not parallel to one another. So her angle is ever so slightly more vertical. So she's like tilted at maybe 3 degrees, maybe 4 degrees, a little bit further, possibly. And then his body angle here is much further. I mean, he's at like 40 to 45 degrees. In fact, he might even be more. I can't put the cursor any lower. But yeah, I think he might be. But what that does in terms of think about like the simple shapes of this, is that her shape here actually has a vanishing point, like a horizon line that's way down below the composition. And his vanishing point, the base of his shape is probably at the same point. So they almost form like a triangle in the frame. Yeah, just a very simplistic triangular shape. Simple angles and simple geometric shapes that are used as the blueprint to design something that's like fantastic. Right, next thing I want to talk about, because we want to get through this, I want to do at least an hour where we're just like drawing, just creating. So moving on, so these ones, the paranormal ones, they're quite interesting. So what I wanted to show you with these is that we need to start thinking about more than the shapes. So for example, we need to start thinking about the way that the environment is designed and the way that that environment is lit and constructed and dressed. Okay, think of it, even if it's an animation, if it's completely 2D, you still have to think of it like a film. The set needs to be dressed. Yeah, the characters need to be wardrobed. Think about that entire production pipeline. So with these are good examples of storyboards or story art that convey more than just character position and composition. They also convey things like lighting. So this one's really subtle. Notice how they've just put some nice, simplistic, darker strokes here, just painted in to create a clear direction for the light. Under his arms there, just really simple lines, some nice darker patches here. So we're just clarifying, the light is coming from the left of this shot and it's quite high. That's what we know from that. Same for this one as well. So it's not just about where the characters are, but thinking about the framing of the camera. So this camera's got a tilt as well. But also there are some really subtle bits of value changes, just here and here. And obviously the door has got a value change implying that it's dark inside or that we're going into an interior lit space as opposed to an exterior or omni-lit space. So just these kind of details, these are what we need to start to think about. And then this is where it gets really clever, is shots like this, which have got loads of detail on lighting. Really, really clever lighting design. I mean, it's not just the simple stuff like we had the exterior omni lighting, which has been lit, yeah? But the starting value for this whole shot is actually really, really low. Yeah, it's quite a dim, dark grey. So you can see it here, and they've got, and then, so we're starting with the lower values, and then moving up to the slightly higher ones. We've got this ceiling window. Yeah, so we've got we've got light coming through, and coming through against bars as well. And that's really interesting because then we've got like a weird reflection of that in the tiles on the floor. So yes, you've got the circle of light as it comes through, but then they've kind of recognized, oh look, you know what? That's going to be really hard to draw those. So why don't we make it a tiled floor, and it will kind of keep a bit of consistency in the design. And then little things like the shadows under their chins now. Yeah, so we're keeping consistency. There is the light source. Look at how this character, and I apologize that you can't see that very clearly, but I'll upload the PowerPoint so you can go back and look through these images. But she's partially lit. So just like the front of her face is lit, and her chest and her hips and her left thigh, because she's just stepping into that light. So it's very, very subtle use of lighting design. But from a production perspective, the lighting and rendering team can look at this and go, okay, yeah, we kind of know what we've got to do. Even at this early stage, we're getting an understanding of me in my lighting team, what our responsibilities are going to be for this shot. So when this is presented to us, I can make notes and I can start to plan how we realize that and how we bring this to life. Okay, so it's just really simple stuff. And here as well, this is great. This, you see how that partial lighting going on here? Because I love the foot placement thing. His foot is placed in the light, but it's shadowed, and it's shadowed by his body. So he's got some really nice lighting design there. And here as well, see how the front of her foot's out, the back of her foot's in, and it's reflected in the light, and her arm here. And then this is a kind of cheesy shot design tool, where in order to make it look like the character's seen something important, you literally shine a light in their eyes. But it works. You know, it's an effective piece of storytelling. It works. And then, yeah, again, we've got that backlit. So this is interesting because they're out of the light now. They're not in the ceiling light. But what they are doing is that the light from back here, this light, because this light's coming straight down, so it's not really going to affect them at all. But this light, this omni light from outside, is actually what's casting this, causing these kind of shadows here. So they're not just thinking about the light that you can see in the shot. They're thinking about the light that exists in the space. Okay, so when you're designing a shot, think about it like an actual film. Even if it's 2D, it's a physical, three-dimensional space where the rules of physics apply. The way light moves and bends and reflects and refracts and diffuses, all those rules apply even in 2D animation. So that's another example of where this is from Wreck-It Ralph, but I like the idea that they baked the characters in light. I think this is the shot where they're in the Mentos volcano, and she's throwing Mentos into the volcano, and they're like erupting. But yeah, they're baked in light. So the light is in front of them, they're sitting in front of it, so they create these kind of burnt shadows. But no, the reason I thought I'd show you this in terms of lighting design for story art is notice how their silhouette is not whole. Because light, when you've got a rough surface, like a rock, skin is not smooth, it's very, very rough. Actually, it's made up of tiny, really detailed surface architecture. The rocks that they're sitting on, they're not smooth surfaces either. And the way that light works, and I'll draw a little demo of this in a second, is when it hits a rough surface, it diffuses across that surface. It bleeds across it. It's only when we hit a sharp surface, a hard, smooth surface, that it deflects and bounces straight off. So when a hard surface, where light bounces straight off, you'll get a clean silhouette. A diffused surface, or a light that's spread, you'll get this kind of effect where the light is actually wrapping around the silhouette slightly. This is a very clear message. These shots, especially, so this one and these ones all on the right here, especially up here, Ralph, as he walks across, he has his diffusions coming across his chest and across his back. These are clear instructions for the production. They are saying even with marker pen on paper or whatever. I think this was actually Storyboard Pro, but even when in these simple drawings, they're saying, look, the final shot will have this kind of light rendering, and it's important because that's the way the director wants it. Remember I said about sitting at the table and the director just talks, yeah? Yeah, the director said, I want this, and the story artist has gone, all right, I'll draw that in. I'll make a note of that. I'll show you. I thought I'd just quickly show you that because that's a good example of this done with charcoal. This is from Pocahontas. This is Glenn Keane's story art. Really, really clever design where he's not just thinking about light or about shadow. He's also thinking about reflection. So this is, Pocahontas jumping into the water. And with charcoal on paper, he's actually marking in how he wants the light to reflect the cliffs. Because she's jumping into like a rocky pool. So the cliffs have got vertical sides. And he wants that reflected in the water. So even with a rough material like charcoal, he's kind of pushing that into that shape and saying, look, this is what we want it to look like. So with all that considered, these drawings, which we looked at last week, which are good, I'm not knocking them, they are fantastic and they're brilliantly effective at conveying the story. Look at how much information they are missing compared to something like that. Yeah? This is a piece of story work that is clarifying acting. Yeah, it's clarifying how the performance needs to be conveyed to the camera. What it doesn't do as effectively is convey the space and the environment. Okay? And that's where we're going now, is we're stepping beyond this. This is now too simple and too easy, and we need to go and take it up a gear and start to think about this level of design. Okay? So what we're going to do, I don't want to overshoot this. I would like you to get your sketches, your things to hand. If you've got them on paper, brilliant. If you've got them on Moodle, obviously log into Moodle as well on the devices. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open up Photoshop. And when you open it, can you just do me a favor and open it just on this Create New tab here? So don't create anything. We're just going to open it on this tab, okay? So let's have a look. Okay. Right. While you're doing that, I'm just going to check and make sure that everything's happy and the stream still works. That's always nice. So I'm just recording this. So you can go back and just watch it for reference. And also, there's a couple of people who weren't able to make it. Right. Has everyone got Photoshop open? Yeah. I don't want to whiz too far ahead, so I'm just going to give you a minute to kind of get Photoshop open, get it to this screen. You'll have to excuse my croaky voice, and it's not because I'm just really ill. Glad I'm not the only one. Okay, so what we're going to do, and I've done this before with some of you actually, we did a little bit on this last year. I want to just take a moment to create the appropriate format template to begin working on this content. Okay, how you work in Photoshop, because Photoshop is so complex and it's so big sometimes, and we get so caught up with certain aspects of it that we lose sight of other things that are really important. So I wanted to just sort of stop for a moment and talk through how to create the right kind of file in Photoshop that will be really helpful for this kind of work, for story artwork. So I'm going to go up here. So I'm going to go, sorry, I don't know if you saw I just clicked there. So on this opening screen, you've got a little Save Preset button just here. I'm going to click that. And then I'm just going to create a new piece called Story Art. And then I'm going to make some changes to the file structure. So I'm going to go for, I'm going to try and do something that's not going to bust your machine, basically. I'm going to go for 4, no, I'm not. I'm going to go for 5,000 pixels by 5,000 pixels and 72 dpi RGB color because we're not printing these. These are digital artifacts. And then the last thing I'm going to do is in the color settings. So if you click on the back where it says background color, you can select custom and then click the little color setting and just make sure under your hue, saturation and brightness sliders, so your HSB sliders, which are your best friends for any of you who do digital art, your HSB sliders should be your go-to kind of tool for a lot of your color work. Your brightness, this B, is set to 50%. So it's exactly halfway between light and dark. Okay, that's my light being 100% brightness, dark being 0. So set that to 50, make sure the others are at 0, ignore all the other stuff like the RGB, CMYK, and the lab colors, and then just hit OK. And then you can save that preset, and you'll see I've now got this one under saved called Story Art, and I'm just going to hit Create. And what I should be left with is this enormous screen that I need to make this smaller. This is unusable. I should have a square that looks like this. Okay, so can you just give me a thumbs up when you've done that? Or when you're, yeah, okay, so some people, yes? What's up? What's it doing? Okay, so yeah, we're just going to pause for a second, then we'll talk through what we're actually going to do with that. So we'll switch on. You slide it up and then plus it. It should switch itself up. Yeah. They are working. Right, what's up over here? So once you don't worry about this, just fill in this part. So, no, don't worry about these. Just type in, just here, just new. So yeah, no, don't worry. So you type in 5,000 by 5,000 at 5,000 plus 5,000 pixels by 72 dpi. Yes. Yeah. So we go, don't worry about that. So we go 5,000, 5,000. That means it was 72.
72 only.
72 dpi, yeah. The reason it's a 72 pixels per inch, is because that is the more or less go-to resolution for screens, is 72 pixels per inch. The reason we're working in pixels and we're working in RGB color, this will never be printed. Okay, this is just for digital work, a digital workflow. So the next thing we're going to do is everyone in. Some people are still loading up Photoshop. You can use the keyboards if you want to. I like the keyboard on the Mobile Studio Pro, but sure, up to you. What we're going to do now, we're just going to get this kind of ready. We're going to do it super fast because I don't want for things to kind of take too long. We're going to go to our rectangle tool. And then before we kind of do anything with the rectangle tool, we just need to make sure that the settings are correct for us.
The black was 50, right?
Yeah, so the background is 50% brightness. So before I draw a rectangle, I want to make sure it's got no fill. So that's no fill. The stroke is black. And 5 pixel width is absolutely fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of guess out roughly what I want. And I want to create a rectangle that is 1920 wide by 1080 high. Look, that's not bad. It's pretty close. It's not perfect. That was 1922. By 1065, but once I've drawn it, before clicking anywhere else, so I drew it, I can go up here and I can actually type in 1920 by 1080, and I can just adjust it up there. And then what I'm going to do with those is I'm going to right click it down in the layers, and I'm just going to create a duplicate. And then with the duplicate, no, just you. Let's turn auto select off. I'm just going to take the duplicate down a little bit. I might do 3 actually. I might just do 3 versions of this. Duplicate that again. And then drag that down. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a space where I can work. Basically, I'm just creating a functional working space. So what I'll then do is I'm just going to grab all 3 of those rectangles I've made, put them in a folder. I've called it frames, and I'm going to lock it. Anyone want to tell me why are my frames? Why have I got 3? What's the point of a 1920 1080 frame? Sorry?
That's the aspect ratio.
Yeah, that's standard. That's a standard HD aspect ratio. It's 1920 by 1080. So this is the next kind of step of like that design thinking for cinematic kind of design is if you're going to create something that will end up on a screen, design it on the aspect ratio of a screen. Yeah, draw inside that same ratio. That way, when it transitions from your drawing to a piece of animation, the animation stands the best possible chance of looking like your drawing. Yeah, just really kind of simplistic workflow technique. So I'm just going to create a new layer now. Well, not in the frames. I want to put it, let's get it all the way out of the frames. And just put it, that's it. No. There we go. So I've just got a new drawing layer now that I've just set underneath those frames. Now what I'd like you to do is I want you to select one of the preferred shots that you drew. So I'm not kind of just asking you to do things for the sake of it here. I can put that. So there's mine. All right, I have done my own sets of doodles. Some of them work really nicely. Some of them are absolutely horrific. I had a go at kind of, where am I up here, redesigning the 3 panel and just thinking about like, what about instead of shooting it upright, shooting it side on. I've got this one. This one. I've got a mirror in front of me. It's really hard. My left and right's going out the window. So that one there, that is, I was sort of thinking about, you know, the shot where Peter just gets a lamppost just straight in the face. And the way they do it is from like a POV of it coming towards him, and then they do it again where you're looking like straight at his face. So I thought, what about doing that side on? So he's just like the snowman headshot, sort of doing that side on, but instead of it being just sort of drifting along, it hits him in the face. But what I thought is, as it hits him, to have Miles inadvertently adopt like the Spider-Man landing shape on his back. So he's like accidentally taken on this like a very kind of well-known Spider-Man kind of crouched position, almost like he's sort of surfing on top of Peter. But it'd be accidental. So I thought it'd be quite nice to almost like allude to what Miles is going to become. Yeah, he's on the journey to becoming Spider-Man. So just an accidental pose. The other one I did was kind of a more tense one, actually. So it was this one. So I sort of sketched out the idea of him sort of backing away towards the wall. And as he's backing away with Peter like dead behind him, yeah, like slumped over Miles's back. But actually having the light on the floor kind of moving up towards him. So you've got those strong spotlights that start to drift upwards. So it builds tension, almost chases the character across the shot. And then the other one I thought of is I like the idea of when they come off the bike to expand the impact frame and have all 3 characters, the cyclist, Miles and Peter, all just kind of get thrown towards the screen, but all be in different poses, and just kind of play on this idea of like Peter being a corpse. So I thought have him like a rocket, just fly off like a launched rocket. So those are all the ideas I was playing with. I'm hoping you've got yours set out as well. What we're going to do now is actually start thinking about like how do we design inside this space and how do we kind of use it. So the first thing I want you to think about, we'll go to just one of these frames. All right, we're not doing all of them. We're just thinking about one. And I'm going to start planning out 2 different ones here actually. So I've got multiples obviously, and we're going to start that planning process. So the first thing I want to think about is what is the most important thing in the shot? Now, for everyone it might be different, but there are some general rules to think about here. With your shots, you are most likely to find in an action sequence or a sequence that is very character narrative heavy, that the most important thing is the characters, where they are placed. When I said about starting with geometric shapes, very basic, very simplistic, that's what we're going to do. So don't start drawing a person in. Okay, nobody draw a person. What I want you to draw instead is within this frame, roughly, where are the heads of the characters that are featured? Okay, so for mine, I'm going to start with the explodey shot, and I've got one head here. I've got one head here, and I've got another one which I'm not quite sure how to. I think it's going to be vertical. I think I've got to keep one vertical. So yeah, one's about here, and I just want you to draw the direction of movement on those heads. Okay. So there's mine. Keeping it really simple, okay? I don't want it to be anything too complex at this stage. So that one's probably, actually I think it'd be really nice like going up, really, really high arced. And then this one kind of going maybe even lower actually. Really going down. Yeah. Okay. So why am I starting with the heads? Well, it's not a hard rule, but as a guide point, it's quite important to think about, if I'm putting characters in the shot, is it because that's where I want my audience to start looking, or is that where I want my audience to stop looking? So every shot should have a rhythm. We talked about this last week. We should move our eyes. When we look at a cinematic sequence, our eyes should not be fixed on one point. They should drift through the shot. And we have to design how we want our audience to drift. Where do I want them to start looking? Where's the thing that will catch them first? And where do I want them to stop looking? Yeah, where does their journey end? Where does their journey start? And it's quite common with any character-focused shots that it will start or end with one of the characters. Yeah, that they are kind of the beginning or the end point. Now, there's a couple of tricks you can use. You can use size. You can use position to define who's the most important one. So I'm kind of using position because what I'm doing here is I've got only one of the characters is both large in the terms of his head size. So I'm going to put that in a capital so you can see it. Only one of them is both sizable in terms of how much of the composition it occupies, but also entirely in the frame. So the one that's larger, this head down here, he's partially out of the frame. Okay, he's sunk out of it. So he can't be the most important element within that. All right. So already I'm kind of making some notes here about what's going to happen. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start to think about if I want this to be the most important thing, how do I do that? Like, how do I make sure that everyone knows that's where I want you to look? So the first thing I'm going to do, this is, I should start making notes. I'm going to create a new tab. Sorry. I'll just do some quick notes. This is Miles. This is Peter. And this is the cyclist. Okay? Just for reference. So the shot I'm going for is the moment after the impact. Yeah, so we saw it a different way. I want to shoot it with them all kind of flying up in the air. But like I said, I like the idea of like Peter Parker just like dead Rocket Man, just soaring up into the air. Miles kind of hanging on as best he can. But I really like the idea of playing on Miles doing very kind of well-known Spider-Man poses, because I think that plays into the narrative. And then terrified cyclist who's just been hit by a homeless dude and a child, yeah? Kidnapped, effectively. Momentarily kidnapped by a homeless dude and child. So what kind of techniques can I do? So first thing I've done is this head position, this one here. Okay? I'm going to make this kind of low, but I want to keep it... I'm going to flex that a little bit more, actually. Let's go back. I'm going to just bring in... Oh, my eraser's enormous. Let's make that a little bit smaller. Actually, you know what? Let's just redraw it. So this head's going to be about here, a little bit smaller. I want to kind of flex it, and I want to bend it. Maybe even flex it lower than that, actually. Yeah. So I want to see mostly the top of Miles's head, and I want to get his shoulders really high. So I'm just making a note on his shoulders. Let's get rid of that. What Miles is also doing here in terms of head position is he's looking at Peter. So straight away, what that does is that says to our audience, oh, he's looking over there. What's he looking at? He's looking at Peter. So we're just guided towards this. We're guided towards this position. The next thing I'm going to do, just to really cheat, and you can because it's animation, is obviously this guy's terrified. So he's going to be wide-eyed. We know that. And he's probably going to be kind of open-mouthed. But what I want to do is I want to put, like, get his eyebrows up really high. And obviously he's got a massive bike helmet, so that's going to kind of play into it a little bit. Yeah, I want to really push it so that his eyes are kind of directed straight upwards as well. So everything is going to push us to look in a very specific way. So I might go in a little bit. All right, calm down, Siri. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. Just kind of clean that up. Might even push his eyes a little bit higher. So just kind of go up, push him up as high as I can. Yeah. So this is just my rough sketch. This is just me working out, like, okay, what's the relationships here? So the next thing I said was that I wanted to create some movement and direction. So I need to think about, well, Peter's going to be, I said Rocket Man, didn't I? So I think we should do that. I think that's going to work. I think the Rocket Man thing is going to work really well. So just to kind of have him, yeah. And even to the point where even his hands are just going to be like right down, like by his side, just sort of sticking out awkwardly like that. And then obviously he's going to be completely out of it. Okay. So that's my first position. The cyclist, I think I'm going to bring an elbow up. So the reason I'm going to bring an elbow up is because I want a line. I know it sounds mad, but I literally want to draw a line that says "look up here." Okay, so I'm going to bring this guy's elbow and shoulder right up as high as I can. Actually, I'm not going to like go overboard with it. It's going to be kind of like that, but it just creates a movement there. All right, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I really want to play on those kind of Spider-Man shapes. I think this is the point where we do that. So I'm going to get this kind of folded over as much as I can, and kind of get like a. I don't know what I'm doing. Sorry, I just realised I'm drawing like this. What am I doing? I should just look down. Yeah, I want to kind of, those really big like knee shapes, and then maybe kind of pull his arms forward like that. because obviously he's got a coat. That's the other thing. That's the other. All right, we can play on this even further. Actually, because he's wearing a trench coat. I'm gonna flap the coat so it looks like a Superman cape. So we've got like a dead Peter Parker Superman kind of coming off the bike, and that's what I'm gonna play with. But straight away in this, and this is just this is what we call those fundamental shapes. If I just draw another overlay on this, I'm just going to put another layer in. We'll go to green. What we've got is we've got a very clear line going this way, okay? And we've got a triangle of shapes. Really simple compositional design. We've also got, by having the elbow, his feet, and kind of this shape, we've got here a relatively clear vanishing point and horizon line in the middle of the shot. So everything starts there and is just flying towards the screen. That's what we're aiming for. It starts in this middle and flies out towards us. This is just my layout. This is a rough, okay? But this is where we need to go now. Is I want you to take your little doodle and I want you to blow it up, but start with the fundamental shapes. What is the thing that you want them to look at? Go back to these rules, wherever they are. Let's go back. These, yeah, good grammar, built on the perspective. So the perspective is that it's almost like for my shot, the perspective is that we're almost like standing the other side of the car, like the car door. They've hit the car, like the car door, and they've all just kind of flown at us and over our heads. Apart from the cyclist, who's probably going to land on me, the camera operator. Okay? But everyone else has just kind of gone up, upwards. All right? So that's kind of what we need to think about, the perspectives. Where do we want them to look first? What do we want those basic shapes to be? And what can we build into this to emphasize, just how kind of important the narrative is, and emphasize that whatever's happening in your shot is happening. Whether it be the police shining the torches, him hitting the side of the subway, then hitting the cars, the thing where he kind of, I love the shots where he flies against all the graves and the headstones. Is really nicely composed. Are you working on that one? So that's what we need to do now. Is I want you to very rough, very kind of simplistic, start planning out those shapes. The next thing that we need to do, okay, and because we're going to kind of move through this relatively quickly, is use the space around you. There is a reason why you have all of this spare space in this canvas. Write notes. Do more thumbnails. Just because you did it once on paper doesn't mean it's correct, and doesn't mean it's the best version of that exact shot that you're thinking of. Yeah? You've got the frames where we're going to do the real thing, but what I'd like you to do now is actually think about the design. Like, sketch out, make some notes. If you've got a digital version, or you want to take a photo, you've got it on paper, but you quite like it next to you, take a photo of it on your phone, email it to yourself, import it into the workspace. Okay? So that's what we're going to do now. I want you to spend a good, maybe 20 minutes doing this rough layout and getting it detailed, because I'm going to keep going. I've got things to draw in terms of like background information and vehicles and vertical lines that I need to add and things like that. And then at exactly 20 past, we're going to stop. And then we're just going to look at the last couple of elements that we add. So what is the next stage of this? Okay, so 20 minutes. Let's see kind of how much we can work through. So we'll take off my notes layer, that one. Also, when you're drawing, I promise you, it really doesn't matter what pen you use. No one cares about brushes. Like, just use the flat brush or whatever. It's not important. And don't draw black. Okay, you can see I'm working. If I bring up my HSB sliders, I'm working at 30%. So yeah, I'm not interested in black. Okay, black is too strong. Use greys, because you can draw over them and you can lower their opacity really quickly and really effectively. So yeah, now is the point where you're keeping it rough. I might make that a little bit smaller. I'll go down just a little bit to about 25. What's up? Yes, yeah. Sorry? Yes, 8-bit color, 8-bit RGB color. Yeah, because you just click it here. Then you've got 1920 across and 110. So that what? What's the draw and shape? So that's the shape. Yeah, so it's just duplicate. Yeah, so just duplicating them. So it just creates multiple versions. Copy. So just create multiple versions and then you select all of them and then drop them into a folder. So just start putting them into a folder that way. The reason I'm putting them into a folder is so that I don't accidentally draw over it. So now I've got a separate drawing over it. Yeah, it's just a standard folder. Okay. So and then with that one, it's fine. We can just go in and move them. Select the one you want, which is selection tool. Okay, just keep working for it. Yeah, they're all well to move. So these should be uploaded onto me. I haven't checked them yet, but there's a folder for each one.
We see each other's all together here.
On Moodle you'll be able to. That's why we're all uploading into that
I
space.
can choose other people.
Yeah. You can see other people's stuff. Right. Okay. Where were we? Yeah. So I'm just going to keep kind of working at this. Remember, this is supposed to be ugly. Draw ugly. Yeah. Don't be afraid to make a bit of a mess, because actually what we're doing is we're just establishing the relationship between objects. I think with this one actually, I'm not going to do both hands. I think both hands is too. We're going to keep that. Keep that. And then I'm going to like really rotate the shoulders, I think. And then have him Just kind of holding on.
When you save, is better as layers or as a copy?
You should be, so when you're saving, you should be saving as a .psd Photoshop file with all its layers included. Yeah.
You need to take more than the layers.
Yeah, everything should be ticked. You should be saving all information when this kind of work. Save everything. Save all of that info. So I'm just trying to think like, well, what's his kind of rough layout here? I'm going to keep and start to kind of refine shapes. So I built the basic shapes, but I actually need to kind of build like the more kind of detailed ones. There we go. This is not about neatness, it is just about understanding how all your pieces fit together. Like, what is the relationship between all of these objects? Okay, don't overthink it, not yet. So I'm kind of happy with my shapes at the moment. So the next stage really, and I've added some other stuff as well. The next stage is to really look at like what's the environment. So I don't know if you kind of watching what I was doing there. Probably not, because you're doing your own thing, rightly so. I was thinking about like what can I do with that background, and how can I kind of make that work? So I thought maybe this belongs as one of those slowdown shots. You know, maybe it should be kind of kept quite similar to how it is actually in the original, in that it's a shot where you're pausing from the action for a moment. So does that mean I take the background out? Or do I kind of keep the background in? If I keep the background in, I think it's already going to be that it's like a lot of vertical lines. So let me just, I'll lower the opacity on this for a second. That's something. Let's put this one below. So I'd probably bring in like lots of kind of verticals of like buildings and stuff. Like that. And I'd frame it the same way as well. So I'd have like a building over here and a building here. And then I'd start to put in like the edges of the buildings like towards the background. And obviously you don't want anything too close. And then that would be for the actual top line, so the top half of the image. And then at the bottom, I'd have to put in lines kind of going this way. So yeah, I'd have to put like the roof, probably put the roof of the car like here. So underneath you've got some detailing on the car, so it kind of look like that underneath. So yeah, imagine kind of like this is my automobile, like windows here. Well, kind of keep those vertical lines. Well, so, yeah, I'd kind of keep something like that, and then obviously I'd have to draw another one in. Notice how I'm working on layers here, just because, you know, keep it simple, stupid. You know, just don't overthink it. Separate them out as best you kind of can. And then, yeah, it's middle of traffic, isn't it? So I'd have to put another car in here. Can you see what I'm doing with the perspective, though? I'm keeping everything linked, not just to, like, obviously, like, if I make those invisible, I am keeping a logical sense of perspective in the drawing. Like, I'm sketching in, like, this is, think about the height of this camera. Anyone want to tell me, how high is that camera off the ground? It's got to be, yeah. I'm going to put it at about 8 feet, roughly. I'd say it's about 8 feet off the ground. So it's a fair height above, because they're taking off. You want to catch them as they go up into the air. Yeah? I don't want it to feel like, if the camera was really low and it was like them soaring overhead, they'd look like the Avengers. Do you know what I mean? It would look like impressive. Or look at them fly. I don't want that. I want it to look a bit clumsy and awkward, obviously, because they've just fallen off a bike. So I'm kind of keeping to perspective, but what I'm also doing is making sure that the perspective here that I'm sketching in, so maybe wasn't there like there's a bunch of like trucks, or no, is it school buses? So there's like a bunch of buses or something, isn't there? So I'm going to have to like put some buses or something in. Kind of works. Yeah, like that. I don't know what a bus looks like, I've forgotten. It's a train. Yeah, so I'm going to have that in there, and that's going to keep to the sensibility of like the perspective, because there's the vanishing point. But what's important actually is that it doesn't clash with the focus of this layer. Okay, I have to make sure that they all kind of work together. And it does. It does create a kind of central line down the middle there where everything is kind of working. Okay, it does kind of, it's not perfect perspective because I've got two vanishing points. I've got one, if I go back up, sorry, to my guide layer. Yes, I've got one vanishing point here and one vanishing point here, but you know what? It's kind of passable because it actually is passable because here's the origin point for the characters and here's the origin point for the environment. So it does kind of make sense. So the next step, it's 20 past now, the next step is where it gets like kind of hard. Because what you now need to do is think about things as a physical space. And this is difficult. I'm not gonna tell you it's easy, just do it, because it's not easy. What you need to do, I'm gonna create another layer. I'm gonna do it right up here. I'm gonna call it floor plan. Okay, and then with this layer, I'm going to move over to the side here, and I'm going to start thinking about, right, this is a real set with real people and real lights, and everything, for the most part, except Spider-Man, obeys the laws of physics. So what does this actually look like in terms of physical space? Well, I know that I'm kind of working on a street scene. So let's say this is my mock-up of my street. And I know that I've got kind of vehicles that are going to line like this. And I know that my main kind of incident point with my three characters is going to be, is going to be here in the middle. So these are my cars. Here's kind of like the sidewalk. Yeah. And it's going to happen here. So what do they actually look like? Well, I know the door's open, so just mark that. That happens there. So my action's taking place past the door. And what I need to think about is where are my characters? So I know that so the bike is back here. The cyclist is about here. Peter, because he was at the back, Miles is about here. And Peter is higher up, about here. Okay? It's going with my white pen. Where are my light sources? Because that's now what I need to think about. Where is the light in this shot? We know for a fact that there are street lights, because it's New York. Lights down here are going to have absolutely no impact at all. So anything that's behind the camera, unless it's facing directly at a character, so the light's coming directly over the shoulder of the camera operator, you probably won't pick it up as a direct light. Okay, it will add to like an omni or a global light. So these ones down here, these street lights, not important. These ones are important because what they're going to do is they are going to illuminate the tops of all these cars. Okay, all these cars are going to get touched particularly on the outside edges. These cars are going to get lit. Obviously, this car here is going to get lit across the top here, across the back and across this edge, back and edge. The next thing that's going to happen is every single one of these cars has got headlights. So they're going to clip the back of each other and bleed out to the side. Yeah, they're going to shine directly at one another, but they're going to bleed out to the side. Okay, like that. So I'm really thinking hard now about, like, this is I'm standing in this space. In my mind's eye, I'm in this space. This is all going to be lit here. And you've got, it's going to flood out, hit the back of this vehicle, probably wider actually. It's going to come wider like that. Hit the back of the vehicle and be lit up. So if that's a top-down view of where the lights are, if we think about it now as a vertical system, so let's say this square's the worst square ever. That square, I'm doing it again, I should just look down. If this square is like a cross-section of the space, what does that look like? Well, we know that we've got very faint lights here, and a beam of strong lights at sort of knee height. Okay, so there's faint lights, which are the street lights, because they're quite far away from the action, that are not going to be particularly strong. But At knee level, because of all the cars with their headlights, there's just going to be light all across the floor. So what that means is our characters are going to be lit from underneath. The light is going to shine out of the headlights. They're going to bounce off all the cars at that level. They reflect off the floor. Headlights, for obvious reasons, are incredibly powerful. We can assume, as it's New York, that the floor is wet. So it's going to bounce. It's going to reflect, not diffuse, off the floor and kind of come back up. All right? So everything's going to be lit from below. Now, what impact does that have? Well, now in this design, let's get rid of that. We keep my floor plan up. We get rid of... Oh, no. Let's go. I've done that thing. You know, I said you do that thing. You go, I didn't draw that. And then you do draw it. Let's go and take this out. There we go. So what that means for this shot is that now we need to think about, well, this is entirely lit from below. How do we light something as rough as this from below? And the answer really is that you need to kind of simplify it first off. So let's get rid of things that I don't necessarily need to look at. So we'll bring in just our characters. I'm going to add a new layer. Oops. I'm going to add a new layer just below them. And then in that layer, this background is 50% black. Do you remember? So I'm going to take this right down to 35, 40% black. I'm going to make my brush nice and big. Bigger. Broken the computer now. There we go. Let's increase that opacity a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of saturate this. So I've just lowered this down. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select and get rid of the excess. It's my own fault there for using a textured brush. There we go. Now what I can do with this, now I've made it dark, is actually go in with the lighter values and start to paint in, well, where's lighter? So let's go smaller. So straight off, I know that here, so his legs are going to be, they're going to really catch the light. So I'm going to paint those in. And then here as well, kind of on his underside, yeah, because he's coming up from the floor. His chin, just there. It's going to catch it, and his nose is going to catch it, and possibly a little bit there on the side of his face. Yeah, so I'm going to move through and now start to paint in. Okay, where's the real highlight part? So these are kind of the medium lit parts. His underside there, his chin, his arm reaching across. It's still really rough, but I'm starting to think about how the light actually works in this space. That's going to be lit really light. This is going to all be light. This is his underside of his arm, yeah? And then what I'll do is I'll go and lift it up again slightly, so a little bit higher, and just do the real bright patches. So here, 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 and go back down. So just marker it. So if you hold I to do an eye drop, just tells you where you were. Just go up ever so slightly and start to the medium areas. So just going up just a little bit every time, just kind of doing the medium areas and just catching where I think it's going to be slightly brighter. That's too much. I'll go back actually. You want to get it just above where it was. In fact, this is probably a good time to move to the HSB sliders just before we finish. So HSB sliders, so that was at 30. I'm just going to take it down to like 25 because in 25 I've got darker patches. So that's going to be darker here. His shoulders are going to be darker as well. And his collar. Everywhere he's kind of out of the light is going to be darker. Top of this guy's head, his helmet's going to be darker. Here's going to be darker. So I'm actually now painting in a little bit of three-dimensional shape. Notice how this is all still rough as well. I'm just thinking rough. So this is your next task before the session next week. I would like you to take this one frame. I would like you to sketch it out into Photoshop. I want you to paint in the light and the dark. And then once you've done all of that, I want you to go back to this layer, put a layer over the top of it, and do a cleanup. Because that's ugly as hell, okay? And it needs refining. I want you to go in and get clean lines, clean shapes. So that actually when you come into the session next week, you've got that. Yeah? That's where we're going to. So we're going from rough, ugly drawing to moving through Photoshop, thinking about the space, thinking about light and about placement, and actually refining it into the beginnings of more competent design. Okay? Right, can you all save what you're doing? Save it onto your network drive somewhere, that file. Can I recommend when you save it with whatever. So obviously this is session 2. Save it as a .psb, so a large format document, one of these. It's got higher compression, smaller file size, better than standard Photoshop file. So yes, under there, large document format. So where am I? BA animation. Should probably call it what session? There we go. Right, can you save it? Yeah, log out. Make sure all of your sketches are uploaded to Moodle, please, so you can see what other people are doing and how they're working. But we do need to transition over, so we've got all of about 2 or 3 minutes for you to save your work and kind of be gone, because the other guys are in doing exactly the same session. So yeah, save it, head into one of the other rooms, or down into the digital space. All those machines got Photoshop, and have at it. Yeah, let's see what you can come up with this morning with these. Sorry? No, but you can book them out from the kit room. Yes. At what level? Let's have a look. Have you got them onto Moodle?
I've got the Moodle. I just need to do the shadows of the characters.
Yeah, then it's lighting is probably your next thing, right? So.
So done the shadows of the background.
Okay, right. Let's pause that there. We'll be back for session 3. End the stream.